Oh my goodness. Very brutal stuff. Plausible. The whole notion of human rights or that you should treat prisoners of war humanely is a really relatively new concept.
And the Vikings did have slaves. The axe is like a Hollywood version of what Vikings were using.
I'm wondering if 9th century Scandinavians would have even imagined an architectural structure like this in the afterlife, but it's real pretty. My name is Rachael Hill. I am an assistant professor in the history department at Cal Poly Pomona.
And I'm Sarah Lacy. I'm a professor of archaeology and anthropology, and we are about to watch Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Exciting. We're gonna see some cool tattoos and hairstyles, I'm sure.
And once we're no longer in COVID lockdown, I'm gonna take some of these ideas to my tattoo artist.
All right, let's watch.
There's not a lot of sanitation going on here, though, with this drink.
Which would have been accurate.
Yeah, probably. Alcohol kills bacteria, so.
Right, drinking that mead. These horns that they're drinking out of, too, seems legit.
Well, at least based on what I've seen in movies.
Killer hangover from mead, though, I have to say.
The earliest evidence we have of fermented beverages is probably about 9,000 years old from clay vessels, both in the Middle East and in China, suggesting people have been fermenting alcohol for quite a while. But if you look even at primates, they like to eat fermented fruit from the forest. The percentage of teetotalers versus alcoholics is about the same as it is in humans, so that suggests that we've had a liking for alcohol for quite a while.
They've found all number of things to ferment in order to get drunk, right? I mean, honey, grain, fruit, we're really good at that.
I like the choice of home decor.
Yeah, I'm loving the details. Video games have come a long way since Ms. Pac-Man.
I mean, I decorate my house in animal skulls, actually, so.
Well, that makes sense for someone who studies the prehistoric periods. What about this makeup? What do you think of the eye makeup?
You can mix charcoal and animal fat. I like that we have a female protagonist.
Definitely.
Which we do have evidence of in the Viking period.
Right, shield maidens, yeah?
Yeah, there's a number of like Viking warrior burials that have turned out to be female.
Sorry, have you started?
Yes, obviously. I said you're probably too scared to face me.
Ooh, but they're already pre-rhymed for you.
Insults in rhyme form. A Viking rap battle.
It's the weakest attempt I've yet heard to disgrace me.
The graffiti that I'd seen from the Orkney Isles that the Vikings had left included like describing someone's wife as a real babe and then drawing a dog next to it. And I was like, those insults haven't changed in 1,000 years. Yeah.
You're a sprat. You whine like a little brat.
I'm actually surprised not to see any mother insults. I mean, from what I know, those are also really old. Go for the mother and the wife. That's the ultimate.
Oh, they did have textiles. So showing them with like wool textiles, there's those mummies that have tartan wool that have been found even as far east as China that have been associated with Viking excursions. So that doesn't surprise me, and like the embroidery seems plausible. Certainly furs, I mean, that's goes back to the Paleolithic.
The more embroidery, the more fancier, high status the person, usually, right?
Yeah.
That's...
Society like this where you take your status into death, I would assume that they'd be buried in those items, but they don't preserve particularly well in burials. Well, Vikings had pretty extensive trade networks, so having merchants that would be selling items from even thousands of miles away seems plausible.
I mean, that was a big drive in their wars of conquest, right? Mm-hmm. To establish trade contacts.
And they were trading with people they hadn't conquered, right? Monopolizing amber in the Circumbaltic region and trading that further south, which is how maybe they're getting wine. We do know that they're eating a lot of fish by looking at the carbon and nitrogen isotopes in their bones from burials. But I mean, that's not surprising, right? Humans eat what's local, except now. And certainly like drying fish would make sense because it's a good way to get it lasting. There's different seasons for certain kinds of fish depending on migration patterns. And so if you want to have access to that fish in other parts of the year, or especially over the winter, smoking, salting, drying.
Look at this massive structure here.
Some pretty impressive architecture. Suggests someone with a lot of power who can recruit a lot of individuals to come to one place to build this. It feels a little hyperbolic because even some of the big like buildings you see in Finland, for instance, all this architecture are a lot smaller.
I'm unclear about these carpets that we're seeing as well, if that's something they would have had access to through trade.
I mean, we know they trade with Persia.
Okay, well, there you go.
There's a lot that we don't know about the Vikings because they are highly nomadic. They're building with wood, which doesn't preserve as well. The people who are writing down their history are the people they're raiding. So those people are going to write a history that doesn't necessarily represent how the Vikings view themselves. They're also going to overly state the prowess of the Vikings because they want to justify why they got taken over, right? So these are like short little hungry men from Norway who are trying to escape a famine, and they're described as these like 6 feet tall giants coming down because you want to explain why it is that you got your butt kicked. You know, what we know of them is what other people have described them as, and they're not leaving a lot of architecture, right? They like to conquer, they don't like to stick around and rule.
I'd imagine the settlements would be relatively small, except for maybe sort of trading centers, like certain urban centers where there was markets. You might have denser populations. We're sort of seeing the movers and shakers in the video games. It's not really that fun to play a Viking peasant that's out in the rural area just tending their fields, I'm sure. From what I understand, the Vikings had something like kings.
No serfs. It's not like
yeah,
a serf
not like
structure.
a strictly feudal society, but I just, you know, the majority of the people would have been concerned with the immediate needs of growing food to eat and stockpiling enough to make it through winters, right? The majority of the people weren't the folks that are out there raiding settlements and conquering territories.
And it's a pretty seasonal environment, right? So winter is long. The worst part of the year is like early spring, where you're running out of the stuff from the winter, but the stuff you've been planting isn't producing yet. That's a great time to go raid. Well, I think with a lot of the raids, I mean, you're going after clumped resources, right? So the reason why we think of them going after monasteries, because they have lots of gold and they're not very good fighters. You're going to be strategic about like the cost-benefit analysis of where you're raiding, and probably monks are not particularly retaliatory.
And that would probably determine the size of the raiding party as well, right? Depending on what your target was. Yeah, here they are at a monastery.
Exactly. That's where the money is.
Yeah, get those gold goblets and candlesticks. What do you think about the weaponry here?
I mean, you see the axe as like a Hollywood version of what Vikings were using. I'm not really sure whether that's accurate.
Yeah.
Though I did slice my finger open on a Viking axe in Sweden one
Oh
time.
my goodness.
Did not realize how sharp it was.
And they're mostly wielding them with their hand, which I think that makes more sense than sort of throwing axes. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I don't think so. That requires a level of accuracy.
Yeah.
But certainly they had swords.
Some real up close and personal combat here. There he goes, right into the sanctuary. Get that gold.
Again, that's why you're so concerned about making sure it's a fight you're gonna win, because when it's close contact, right, you're not using like projectiles. You wanna make sure that you live the encounter.
A lot of conversion happening during this time they were political decisions more so than necessarily a heartfelt religious one. To make political alliances, conversion to Christianity was a good strategy for a lot of folks.
And doesn't mean that individual peasants are actually
Yeah.
following through with, you know, the belief or the practices. Hence why we have so many pagan practices now incorporated into modern Christianity.
Yeah, and often kind of a top-down thing. People who are sort of high status convert. The average peasant is still out here talking about Odin and...
Praying to tree spirits.
Right.
Oh, hey,
Jeez.
that's some pecs.
That's some good old-fashioned torture happening, maybe. Is that why he's hanging upside down?
I wonder if rabies was actually a problem.
Oh my goodness. Very brutal stuff. Plausible. The whole, notion of human rights or that you should treat prisoners of war humanely is a really relatively new concept. Geneva Conventions only happened after World War II. If you were captured on the battlefield, if you weren't enslaved for life, you may very well have been subject to some very harsh treatment.
And the Vikings did have slaves. Though these hairstyles look awesome, and certainly I've seen people around town trying to replicate them, we probably don't have a great idea of the kind of hairstyles they're doing because that's not preserved in burials. And the art at the time is like very simplistic, very two-dimensional. I don't know how you would represent someone who's got like half their head shaved when you're just drawing people from the side. But we do have some mummies from southern Siberia that do have some braided hair and some pretty cool tattoos. You go to archaeology conferences and you see many people with replicas of those tattoos.
Called me boneless because I move like a reed in the wind.
I would have assumed he was boneless for having like skeletal deformities, thinking like Richard III with his scoliosis.
Yeah, these are the theories that I've heard as well, that he was born with some kind of congenital disability, and that's where the name came from.
Valhalla. That is where I am bound. I can smell the blood and taste the meat.
Yeah, I mean, that seems accurate. They weren't afraid to die. You
gotta
get to go to Valhalla.
You're not going to be a good warrior culture if you don't have a strong belief in an afterlife or some sort of reward for your behavior.
And be reunited with people that you lost on the battlefield. Yeah. Ooh.
Is that like the Rainbow Bridge?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
It does seem a little bit influenced by Marvel Universe, perhaps, but...
Yeah, I'm wondering if 9th century Scandinavians would have even imagined an architectural structure like this in the afterlife. But it's real pretty.
We don't want to underestimate their ability to be imaginative.
Sure. Are we gonna get to see Odin?
And there are, hallucinogenic mushrooms growing in the area, so we don't want to deny their ability to take advantage of those.
And visit Odin.
Is there an elevator? Because that's a really high tower.
Well, he's just gonna go for it, it looks like. I mean, he's in Asgard, so what could go wrong?
Gravity doesn't have to apply.
No. Is that supposed to be Freya?
Thor, so definitely, these are gods.
Yeah, hence the real fancy clothing, right? It would have been very high status. What's higher than a god?
Any pieces that are made from like multiple materials is typically pretty high status.
I'm digging the beads in the beard. I don't know how accurate it is, but I like it.
You could find that in a burial, I would imagine.
Is he bringing Thor with him into battle? It can't hurt to have a hammer-wielding god on your side.
Is that a bow and arrow on his shoulder?
That does look like a bow and arrow.
We haven't seen them wielding projectile weapons so far.
Could he have picked up that bow from an enemy?
Yeah, potentially.
Here is the battle you died to attain! For Heavy and for Asgard!
Wow, exciting stuff. I'm glad they took us into Asgard. That was really fun to see.
Bring in like the religion to it, because most of the stuff has been grounded really in like village life and raiding life.
Not too bad with the accuracy.
Yeah, I mean, looking at their outfits, the way they're portraying themselves with hair and tattoos, all seem relatively plausible.
And if not, fun to watch anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, you can follow Gamology on YouTube or Facebook. If you look at the genetics of people in Scotland and Ireland today, even just people who live closer to rivers have more Viking DNA. So they really left a huge impact both genetically and on the language. It wasn't just like they came and went.